Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. In this video, we're going to do part 3 of Little Blue Book number 1008, and it is titled The Origin of Religion, written by Joseph McCabe, copyright 1926. And in our last video, we finished chapter 4, so we're going to start with chapter 5. And let's see, where does that one begin? Chapter 5 is the rise of priesthoods, and it begins on chapter 46. There it is. Alrighty, chapter 5 of Little Blue Book number 1008, titled The Origin of Religion, written by Joseph McCabe. Here we go. Chapter 5, The Rise of Priesthoods. Ours is an age of sociology and psychology. You are held superficially unless you can point out the sociological aspects of the matter and make a psychological analysis of it. We have, therefore, theories of the sociological origin of religion, and we have quite a literature about the psychological and psychoanalysis of religion. In the next chapter, we will glance at the latter, leaving a more satisfactory treatment to another book. But we must say a word here about sociological theories of religion as originally proposed by Durkheim. We saw that Sir J. G. Fraser, one of the most influential writers on religion, regards it as derived from magic, or the failure of magic. It is sometimes put that magic in the earlier ages of man was the religion of the individual, and that as social evolution preceded religion, became the magic of the social group. There seem to be two errors in this. First, magic, we saw, did not precede religion. It develops at the same time and in the same proportion. Secondly, religion, the facts have shown us, grew out of individual experiences, not out of social influence. But we have now reached a human level at which the growth of social life does react on the evolution of religion. Social life always means the division of labor, the increase of experts and middlemen. Moreover, with the rise of agriculture, which is unknown to the lowly people we first studied, the course of nature becomes a matter of grave anxiety. Will the rain fall in due season? Will the spirits of the trees and the corn bring forth their usual abundance? Disease also is now thought to be due to spirits. In fact, since spirits are everywhere, in the shark and crocodile, as well as the clouds and trees, a man has a frightful lot of potential friends and enemies to concern himself about. He wants experts or particularly gifted people, so medicine men, rainmakers, wizards, and priests appear. We see the appearance of these middlemen as a quite natural development when we ascend from lower to higher tribes. The Australians have no priest, but, of course, the women and children are, as weaker vessels, not on grounds of sex, excluded from the important ceremonies, and it is the elders particularly who handle the tawdry mysteries of the tribe. Amongst the Malaysians, the next level, we find experts appearing. There is no professional caste, but a man can acquire or buy the art of making the sacrifices and placating the spirits, and he becomes a sort of wizard or higher wizards or priests. Sorry, I skipped a sentence there. Wizards or priests living on his art. Amongst the much higher Polynesians, there are definite priests. They enter into communion with the gods, which is proved by convulsions and contortions. They induce the god to speak in the worshipper by putting out of sight an assistant to play the part of the god. They demand presence in the name of the god. Priestcraft is as old as priesthood. In Africa, the various tribes are at very different stages of development, and nearly the whole evolution of religion can be illustrated from them. Ages ago, we saw the first wave of human distribution flown partly into Africa, and the Bushmen, if not the pygmies of the Central Forest, are surviving portions of the earliest invasion. The Hottentots, that's a crazy name, are a mixture of Bushmen and Kafirs, and their ideas, pardon me, their ideas came between the two, but as their beliefs and practices are a blend, not a natural development, we cannot infer much from them. Then there are the great masses of blacks, Sudanese, and Bantu, but they have made very varied degrees of progress according to the respective degrees of isolation or contact, and we get most useful information about religion from the many books that have been written about them. In particular, we get most interesting glimpses of the progress of gods and priests. The gods of Africa generally are, as we said, glorified ancestors. In fact, it is often a question of a name, rather you call them gods or not. One missionary calls the great spirit of a tribe a god and asks us to see how all peoples believe in God. Another missionary scornfully says that these heathens are merely honoring the ghost of some dead grandfather or grandmother. But a few details about the lower and more primitive tribes will be most instructive, and the reader must remember that here, as elsewhere, the full details and the authorities will be found in my Growth of Religion, apparently a book he wrote. We have, for instance, 3 expert studies of the natives of the Gold and Slave Coast by W.A.B. Ellis. And these natives differ just sufficiently from each other to illustrate the evolution of religion. The first book, The Tishi-Speaking Peoples of the Gold Coast, describes the lowest Sudanese blacks, including the Ashanti. Spirits are located by these men in the whole of nature: the storm, the earthquake, the forest, the river and lake, disease, etc. And they are generally malignant. It is therefore most important to a man to be on good terms with these spirits, which make life on perpetual round of dangers for him. And so there are swarms of priests corresponding to the swarms of major spirits. They offer the sacrifices. They get peace and security and prosperity for a man. They receive and exact generous payment. And Mr. Ellis shows very clearly how it is that men come more and more to believe in the malignancy of spirits and the terror of religion. The priests, in their own interest, exaggerate the fiendish character of the spirits. The belief in this is, he says, steadfastly kept up by the priests and priestesses for their own ends. There are a few private or domestic spirits to which you may yourself sacrifice, but the more important and really dangerous spirits, they insist, through their priest, that only the expert must sacrifice to them and must be well paid, of course. The great nature spirits, including the Lord, turning the page, no, including the Lord of the sky and the rain, Bobowisi, yeah, that's it, Bobowisi, Bobowisi, are not feared. It is the smaller spirits so close at hand and watching every step that one has to fear. Most of these are, Mr. Ellis says, clearly the product and result of priestcraft. A man does not merely worship an ancestor. He sets up an image of a curious stone and employs a priest to get a spirit to enter it. That in his private God, that is his, that is his private God. And he may sacrifice to it. But far more important are the spirits which command the veneration and extort the fear of groups, a sort of beginning of sects or churches. On the goodwill of these everything depends. They are created by the priest, and the priest has a strict monopoly of the cult. He practices conjuring, ventriloquism, and all sorts of tricks to deceive the natives into thinking that he is on intimate terms with the spirit. The natives of the slave coast are a little further evolved, and they illustrate the further development of religion. The little spirits become of less importance. The greater spirits occupy the attention of the blacks more and more. The really greatest spirit, Mawu, the god of sky and rain, is still not dreaded. He is a sort of good-natured father in heaven. The god of lightning is much more important, for much damage is done by lightning in the religion. So his priests and priestesses, who are wives of the god, rise in importance. When a man's hut has been destroyed by lightning, these priests or priestesses come along and examine the ruin. Secretly, they are all expert conjurers. They slip a flint arrow into the heap, and they then produce it to the wondering natives as a proof that the catastrophe was an act of God. I think we'll pause there for hydration. Brought to you by Maddie. Then there is the phallic deity, and we must note that this is about the level where the phallic element enters religion. The natives delight in erotic dreams, and the priests keep them on good terms with the god of love. The sex organ is carved everywhere. Beyond these three major spirits are the usual legions of spirits of dreaded animals of fire and river, forest and harvest, disease and childbirth, and so on. What interests us most is that some spirits are rising out of the primitive crowd to the position of something like gods, and Mr. Ellis tells us that this is not a natural development, but has been brought about by the priesthood. The ambitions and rivalries of different bodies of priests are beginning to make gods. Their spirit, each group says, is the really great spirit, the one that really matters. We must be careful not to suppose that the defying of a great ancestor, the deifying, I swear, or the veneration of a great element of nature was the one way of making gods. Further east along the slave coast is a still higher group of tribes, and Mr. Ellis gives us a book on these. Now the local spirits are generally regarded much as fairies or elves were regarded in Europe during the Middle Ages, and it is a development which sheds a great deal of light even on the religious life of Europe. Just as in Ireland and other places today, the native will light candles around a corpse, or at certain seasons, and his priest will light candles in the church, and no one sees the connection. The original object preserved in the domestic custom being, of course, to scare away evil spirits. So fairies, sprites, witches, etc. are stages in the evolution of religion. The original local spirits of well and forest and nature generally have become mere sprites, elves, hobgoblins, fairies, the little folk, and so on. Where the population remains primitive, as in rural Ireland, these are still held to be very mischievous, if not malignant. But the priests of higher religions frown on them, and in the end deny them. Witches, the real witches, male and female, of medieval Europe, are, on the other hand, representatives of a later stage of European religion. We shall see in a later little blue book that they were organized and devoted adherents of the pagan religion. We see all these developments, or rather interferences, by the priest with development in the African and other tribes. In this second group of tribes of the slave coast, close to but higher than the others, we learn of very significant advances. The god of love, the black one, has now become a goddess and is really the Mother Earth goddess. It is one, as we shall see, of the most fascinating and most important developments of religion before the great ethical religions arise. And, in fact, we can trace its influence right into these. Evidently, priestesses of Mother Earth and priestesses of the phallic god have combined. The fertility of the earth makes this easy. In fact, this last group of Slave Coast blacks show in many ways how religion advances to polytheism and in the direction of monotheism. The priests work out elaborate myths about the great spirits. They are now related to each other as husband and wife, brother and sister, and so on. In plain English, there has been a merger or amalgamation of rival priesthoods. We are moving toward Egyptian, Greek, and Roman religion. There is a very abundant and authoritative literature today about the various African tribes, but in this small sketch we cannot run over it. To those who wish to follow this profoundly interesting study of surviving phases in the development of religion in Africa, I recommend, after the 3 books of Mr. A. B. Ellis, In the Shadow of the Bush, 1912, by P. A. Talbot, In the Back of the Black Man's Mind, 1906, and Nigerian Studies, 1910, by Mr. R. E. Dennett. Sir Harry Johnston's Uganda Protectorate, 1902, A.C. Hallis's The Usasi, 1905, The Nandi, 1909, and Mr. E. S. Hartland's Article on the Bantu in the Dictionary of Ethics and Religion. In all these, we see the same rise from a crowd of spirits to a few outstanding spirits, which, under the fostering influence of the priest, become what we may call gods. We see the nature gods gradually but slowly rising to importance above deified ancestors. We see rude huts over chiefs, remains or fetishes growing into carved temples. We see priesthoods gaining in power, wealth, and organization. We see the departed spirits gradually acquiring a home, at first in the forest or beyond the hills, or in some other vague place, then underground, then with the great spirits in the sky. We see, in fine, a strong tendency everywhere for one great spirit, and it is very commonly the sky god to be predominant. The whole story of man's religious evolution lies before us not in a dead and speculative chronicle, but in living remnants of the various ages through which the race has passed. Science is not a series of guesses. It is a careful interpretation of carefully observed facts. In my larger work, I have then compared the phases of religious evolution which we find amongst other backward peoples of the earth. Pardon me. Pardon me. Eskimos and the Americans, the Asiatics, and the ancestors of the European nations of today. Here I can only summarize the lessons. It is a mistake, as I said, to try to find one root or one line of evolution as to the first beginning of religion. The belief in survival or spirit, I find nothing to contradict the very definite theory which the most primitive peoples suggest to us. At the most, one may think that dreams were the matrix in some cases, but the general truth seems to be that man's shadow made him think that he consisted of the 2 elements, which we now call body and soul. However, I have said that this is not the general opinion, and I have given the other theories. From that level, when man begins to see shadows or spirits in the whole world about him, we must not look for a uniform development. The general tendency is, as we shall see, that the men organize in tribes and have chiefs. The spirit of the chief is still outstanding after death. Any number of gods can be proved to be glorified ancestors, even in the religions of historic times. And from the rude huts or stones over the remains of the chief, temples gradually develop, with sacrificial altars and with organized bands of priests and priestesses. At first, the priest is very apt to be a wizard or chief. But there are 2 separate developments. Nature itself begins to command primitive man's attention. Rain becomes extremely important, and the sky god is correspondingly important. Thunder must come from a very powerful spirit, and the lightning that goes with it tells of an angry spirit that must be appeased. The intense sun and the mysterious moon, the elements of fire and water, the trees and crops which die and rise again every year, the storm, the river, all must have great spirits. More ancestors get displaced by these deities. The frenzy and thrill of sex pleasure must have its own spirit or god. In fine, Mother Earth, who feeds all and by her annual fertility encourages and inspires sexual love. A Father Sky, who pours beneficent rain on all or roars angrily in the thunder, tend to rise above all others, and their priests aid the advance toward monotheism, which means, on that side, monopoly. We are in the world of the early Hindu and early European and other religions. We are at the threshold of civilization, the great religions of which will be described in a later book. And that's the end of chapter 5. And I think we'll end there. Wait a minute, let me see. Nope, there's only a few more pages. Chapter 6 is a very short chapter. All right, so we'll go on. Never mind, scratch that. We're going to go on and finish the book. On to chapter 6, but first I need to hydrate because the cotton mouth was getting intense. All right, here we go. Chapter 6, final chapter, the psychology of religion. It was quite natural that the rich complex of emotions and ideas which we call, in the subjective sense, religion, should attract the attention of the psychologist. Religion as a body of beliefs about another world is interesting. Religion as a human development, a dominating element of the life of man for ages, is a fascinating study. The evolution of religion, which we have shortly traced by means of savage tribes, which preserve primitive stages in the last few chapters, must have spread over 100,000 years or more. But religion as a frame of mind, as an instinctive attitude of man toward the universe, as an eternal and indestructible urge of mind and heart to something beyond the visible, seems to many the most fascinating subject of all. In the recent development of psychology, attention has been especially drawn to psychoanalysis, or the analysis and interpretation of our conscious life largely by means of the influences which rise into it, color it, and distort it from the subconscious depths below. Religion offered a field of exceptional interest to the psychoanalyst, and he has made reflection on it which are understood to be very novel and profound. To many of us, it seems that most of this is neither new nor profound. New words do not necessarily mean new ideas, and obscure words do not always mean depth of thinking. I am familiar with the psychology, I would rather say the mind, of the most interesting religious type, the neurotic young lady in her 20s who displays a great zeal for religion. I was once a priest of the Roman Church, and scores of these ladies bared their souls to me at great length. This was before psychoanalysis was born, yet we knew quite well how much suppressed or unrealized sexual desire counted for in such cases. No one knows this better than a priest, for to him, in the confessional, even the most virtuous young lady is free to talk about her sex emotions, or bad thoughts, as she calls them. And this leads us at once to the height of the matter. There is no psychology of religion. That is to say, there are a million different psychologies of religion. The religious psychology of the Tasmanian is not that of the Australian, and it differs again as we rise to the African, the Polynesian, the Amerind, the Mongolian, or the European peasant. The religious psychology of the Minneapolis lady, with her tremendous Puritanism and social zeal, has not the least relation to that of the Madrid lady, who thinks that the church exists mainly to forgive indiscretions, or of the South Italian or Bulgar or Greek girl who permits unnatural vice without a blush and crosses herself in the presence of a Protestant. The religious psychology of a man is not that of a woman, and there is even no such thing as a general religious psychology of the same sex in the same sect or congregation. It is a very large subject and must be left for special treatment later. All we can do here is to seek if there are any common features at all in the frame of mind which we call religious. It is very difficult to find any such common features, and a reverence for the unknown. Well, the spiritualist is religious, but the objects of his religion, he does not necessarily believe in God, do not inspire awe and reverence, and he would not admit that they are unknown. Probably the mass of Roman Catholics, the illiterate Mexicans and Peruvians, the Italian and Spanish peasants, etc., so rarely feel awe and reverence that we cannot regard it as essential. It is at all events a very small element in what they call their religious life. It is a small and occasional element in the lives of the great majority of religious people. Ask them what religion is, and they will answer correct belief, occasional attendance at church, and a graceful recognition in theory of the moral obligation of Christianity. Religion is not an emotional reaction on the universe or on powers which seem to be manifested through it. Scholars say this, and religious people don't know what they mean. Are Buddhism, as taught by Buddha, and Confucianism religions? They are generally described as such, but Buddha and Confucius were agnostics, as we shall see, and Confucianism, at least, has been faithful to its founder, was Stoicism, which was one of the greatest of moral systems, a religion. But the Stoic was completely indifferent to gods or to anything except the life of man, here and now. Matthew Arnold thought that he had solved the difficulty by defining religion as a belief in a power, not ourselves, that makes for righteousness. A very European or British definition. Most of the religions or gods that man ever invented had no concern whatever about righteousness. Morality touched with emotion was another definition. But all morality, especially social morality, is touched with emotion, and most religions are not touched with morality. It is surely plain that, as far as we have covered the field of religion in this book, there is no common psychology of religion. The frame of mind of the first man who took their shadows to be living doubles of themselves is plain. The shadow was a fact, not a thing to emote about. In the next stage, when the shadows of all dead men hovered about the living, there was still, as some of the lowest tribes show, no particular emotion. It was a mere fact. Gradually, the belief grew that these shadows were malignant. A man rose in the morning with a headache or stomach ache. One of these prowling shadows had been busy during the night. They began to be feared in time to be appeased, first by food, then by sacrifices. In the sense, fear created gods. Priesthoods arose. We saw to help to disarm the anger of the spirits, and like doctors taking dark views of the ailments of wealthy patients, they exaggerated the malice and power of the spirits. And since there were good spirits as well as bad, the rivalry of the spirits or their priests to get more custom led on to polytheism, which means big business, or trusts in the religious world. The elemental powers of nature were, we saw, the last to get any awe and reverence. As to any vague feeling for vague impersonal powers beyond or behind nature, it is philosophers, not savages, who create that. Religion for ages was a matter of bread and butter. To live healthy and happy, in this world, you wanted the favor of good spirits and the blind eye of the wicked. It had, in the overwhelming majority of cases, nothing whatever to do with morals, right up to the threshold of civilization. For 95,000 out of 100,000 years, it was a colossal illusion, impostor, waste of time and resources, and a source of needless terror. I defy anybody to say a good word for it. The world was kept back by it. What the historic religions have done and how the religious psychology changes in these, we will see later. In fine, we may now conclude definitely that there was no primitive revelation and there is no religious instinct. The story of the evolution of religion and of the making of priests and gods and temples which we have surveyed in the story of a perfectly natural and continuous growth. Phase succeeds phase as intelligibly as the feather pen leads on to the steel pen, and this to the fountain pen and the typewriter. And the facts give no indication whatever of a religious instinct, an inner sense or urge, or whatever new name one invented. From beginning to end, it is a question of drawing wrong inferences from observed facts. The shadow, the dream, the nightmare, disease, death, the movements of wind and river and rain, the sun and moon, the annual birth and death of vegetation. The only urge, beyond the subtle urge of priesthoods, is the curiosity of man. He itches to explain things from beginning to end. Religion is an explanation or interpretation of obscure and dark things. That is why it is going and why it is in conflict with science. The sun has risen or is rising. The mountain tops are lit, and the gods have gone from them. I passed Olympus in Greece in the dark one night, but a few hours later the sun would rise, and men would know that there was no Zeus, no Athene. Their valleys still lie in darkness or semi-darkness. Religion puts its spirits there. But the sun rises higher and higher, and religion slowly departs. What an epic! If man had given to the service of man all that he has given to the gods in the last 100,000 years, where should we be today? Exactly. Where would we be today? That concludes Little Blue Book number 1108, titled The Origin of Religion, written by Joseph McCabe, copyright 1926. Thanks for listening, and join me in the next Little Blue Book.